Good afternoon to everybody. What we want to do is we want to thank, first of all, Laya and Dr. Shaya Safan for sponsoring this Dvar Torah. It's Le'ilu Nishmat, their mother Shendel Bat Yaakov HaKohen, and may her this Dvar Torah, short Dvar Torah, be as a schut for her, and may she have Aliyah in Gan Eden. I want to start off with just a remark that Rav Kook made concerning Gdolim. He says there are two types of Gdolim. The Gdolim who were Gaonim, that they were geniuses in the field of the rational, in the field of learning. There were Gaonim who were Gaonim in their personalities, in what he calls the Ratzon, in their will, in their personalities, in their emotions. Not always do these two things go together, but Rav Yisrael Salanter, who was the founder of the very well-known mussar movement, who, as you can see from the heading, lived in the 19th century, was born in 1810 and passed away in 1883. He was a person who was a Gaon in both areas. He was a Gaon in his intellectual capabilities, in his mamash being a Gadol Yisrael and an enormous Talmid Chacham, and at the same time, a person who is pashut a Gaon in his midot, in his personality traits, in his willpower, in his emotions, and these two things merged in one. We all know that at the time of the founding of the mussar movement, there were like a lot of fermentation. I'm speaking out within the Jewish world. There was a lot of movements, the movement of Chassidut. Then on the one hand, then there was also the Haskalah, and a lot of people saw in what Rav Yisrael was addressing some sort of a solution to this like schism and to this polarization that was happening within Jewish people. But on a broader, let's leave it from a broader point of view, I think the basic idea is that he and Chassidut, they came to address is something that everyone knows about, that in that going back to the Torah says, Vayadata hayom vashevota el levavecha, ki Hashem hu Elohim en od bilvado. We say it every single morning in the Aleinu in the afternoon. The evening we say this pasuk from the Torah that you should know, Vayadata hayom vashevota el levavecha. You should know today, and you should return these matters to your heart. That's always been the struggle in every person, in every Jew, seeking to be a better person, seeking to come closer to Hashem. It's how do we develop a system in which we take v'yadata, that which we know, v'ashevota el levavecha, and we take that knowledge and we return it, we put it into our hearts, and that we will experience a change in our personalities, the deeper recesses of our personalities, on the basis of what we know and to transfer it into experience. This has always been the challenge, and this has always been the demand from time immemorial. And everyone in their way has contributed to this dichotomy. How do we know, not dichotomy, this struggle the whole time? How do we take things that we know to be true, and how do we incorporate it in our personality? Not always was the learning of Torah, and even the learning of number one of halakha, the learning of philosophy, and the learning of the machshava and emunah. Not always did that mean that necessarily the person would be an absolute change in personality and how a person would live. The famous words of the Gaon Mivilna, that in the end of in the Zot HaBracha, Moshe Rabbeinu refers to the Torah as being Yaroch Kamata Lichi. The Torah is compared in many, many places, both in the Torah and outside the Torah, to rain. And the Gra made the pithy comment that if a person takes rain, and the rain causes everything to grow, it causes the grass to grow, it causes a tree to grow, it causes also the weeds to grow. In other words, that depending on what's going on many times in our own selves, the Torah wouldn't necessarily cause somehow that the weeds would be uprooted. Other the rain comes, and if there isn't some other system or other mechanism in which we can use the Torah in its proper way, so then that rain causes also not only the good products to grow, but also the negative, like the weeds. So to get back to the point, this was always the way of Vayadot Yom Vashavot Ele Bavecha. I just feel that there's in one, certainly in a couple of minutes, I just don't feel that there's justice that can be done to Rav Yisrael. What do you want to do? So I just wanted to pick up on one or two points. He said that he developed a system of mussar, and mussar is literally a reproving. And he said that there are 3 levels in learning mussar, which brings about a change in personality. The first level is the level of what Rav Ober once called hitbonenut. Hitbonenut means contemplation. So contemplation, number one, of course, as it means contemplation intellectually. A person takes a text in the Torah of the Torah or of the Rambam or whatever, and what he does is he learns it, he contemplates it. The second stage is what he does is he now makes some sort of like evaluation how the words as he's read them and how he looks at his personality, how do the two like fit in? How far is he from what he's now read? How much does he identify with what he's read? And then comes the third crucial part, and that is that after this, first of all, intellectual contemplation, first of all, just the analysis of the text, then afterwards, the summing up of like how he sees himself. Then comes the third stage. The third stage is to go over the material, but in a way of to bring the whole emotions into the text. So in other words, it meant to go over the text a couple of times, 20, 30 times, to, for example, to read it and to sing it. Like, for example, you take a text of the Mesilat Yesharim, that a person before, the basis for all a person's Avodat Hashem is that a person should ask himself, or that not only to ask himself, that a person should have a clear picture, Ma chovato shel ha'adam ba'olamo. What is a person's obligation in his world? So he would first analyze it. Why does it say, for example, Ma chovato shel ha'adam ba'olamo, and not stam? Why does it say ba'olamo and not as the word olam? Then he would evaluate how does he stand up to this chovah, and then he would repeat it. Ma chovato shel adam ba'olamo. Ma chovato, what is a person? The person has to know what is my obligation in my world. And so this repetition, this is what now brings about these 3 stages. This is what helps if it's done it has to be done on a daily level. This is what, for at least an hour, this is what brings about a personality change. And Rav Yisrael Salanter introduced something which was a long time before Freud, and that is the concept of the subconscious. In other words, Rav Yisrael says many times that we take those 3 stages. There's the intellectual stage, then there is the evaluation of how a person thinks, and then there's a repetition, like almost like a calm, like a person singing along, that these things, when done on a daily basis, they don't always have an impact on the conscious level. A person doesn't always feel that he is like sort of moving in any way, but he says the subconscious forces, and he uses that language. The language, he says, is the forces which are hidden within us. They are picking up this tune. They are picking up the whole time what a person has to change. So that was like the great chidush that he said. There's so much more to say, but it's hard like to speak about all his aspects of his mussar. The mussar movement, the mussar learned in that way there were people who were against it in the yeshivot, but basically, I mean, all the yeshivot in the long run, they adopted this method of learning. And I think in every single basically every single yeshiva in the world today, there is what is called a Seder Mussar. A Seder Mussar, usually it's before Ma'ariv, that we take a text, we take a certain book which has got, speaks about personality development, and then what we do is we learn it, and what we do is, but it's a daily, it's always before Ma'ariv, half an hour with a chavruta or by themselves, person takes the text and learns it, so to speak, in this way. So what started off, Rav Yisrael just started off with publishing one or two like letters, epistles, became the basis of a whole movement. He had various Talmidim. Different Talmidim took on different strains of the mussar movement. And this, to a large degree, was, so to speak, the Mignagdisha, if we can call it that. Some people look at it like that. I don't know if that's correct or it's so accurate. He looked at it as a sort of the response, the Mignagdisha response to the problems of the Haskalah, and also an alternative way of character development as espoused in Chassidut. He was known, there are so many stories that we have mamash from written and from other sources about the greatest of this personality. The doctor, there was a famous, one of his Talmidim said that, if you can look at the dates, I said he was born 1810 and he passed away in 1883. I mean, that was basically the time of the theory of evolution, Darwin. And one of his Talmidim said, Darwin says that a person comes we come from our ancestors, that we developed from an ape. And he says, the Talmid just said, that's because Darwin never saw Rav Yisrael Salanter. If he would have seen Rav Yisrael Salanter, he would know that a person doesn't come, his origins are not from an ape, but from a neshama that comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. When Rav Yisrael Salanter went to a doctor, it was hard many times for the doctor to examine him, because when he would say, open up your mouth and say, and then he found it hard to stick out his tongue. He found it like an affront to the dignity of another person, even though Vadai, that for the sake of, I'm just trying to speak about his sensitivity, his unbelievable nobility of character. And there's such hundreds and hundreds of these Sipurim, in which he says that there has to be, and this is in Parshat Mishpatim, that we have to do the mitzvot of Ben Adam Lechavero like we do the mitzvot of Ben Adam Lemakom. But I want to say it's not just a matter of etiquette. What he was saying is that a person, in order to fulfill the mitzvot Ben Adam Lechavero like properly, that not to be over on the Isurim of Gezer or such a thing, we have to go through all those three stages. First of all, to learn thoroughly, and to learn everything that we learn, to learn it in depth. When once, in parenthesis, when Rav Yisrael Salanter heard about a person who was learning only Bekiyut, he was learning only sort of Gemara in order to cover ground, he was just so shocked. He said, how would that person ever be a Yirat Shamayim? How would he ever have the fear of heaven, the awe of heaven? The awe of heaven is not done by something which is, we're not speaking about casually. If a person doesn't do things in depth, so then it doesn't penetrate into the first stage, isn't being done properly. The first stage of him understanding and then referring that and bringing that understanding into his heart. Well, if the understanding is so shallow, so how's it going to bring a new experience and a new movement in the person's inner world? So, how can a person have Yirat Shamayim without learning in depth? So go slower and learn in depth. So I was saying is that that's how he learned everything, this merging in Parshat Mishpatim. He was so careful on the inyanim of Gezel. There's a story of a person who he was invited to someone for a meal, and then before Amotzi, what he did was he took the Tilas Yadayim, and what he did was, he did a little bit on each hand, right? And the Balabait looked at him, why is he being so so miserly with the water. I mean, a person should rather do the mitzvah b'hitul mitzvah. And Rav Yisrael Salanter said it wasn't like we've got today. He says, you know what I think of now? The more that I use the water, then the poor woman who had the maid who has to go now down to the stream in order with a bucket and bring now the water to the house, so that we should do natilas yadayim. But what about that? The more we use, the more she's going to have to go up and down. And there's thousands and thousands of these stories on his hakpada on Ben Adam lechavero. Let us end off with the Rav Yisrael Salanter was known also for his amazing. One of the things that he emphasized a lot was bitachon, that to have not only faith in Hashem but absolute trust in Hashem. In Vilna, there was a great Talmid Chacham. His chidushim are written at the back of every single page of the Talmud, of every Masechet. It's called the Rashash, and the Rashash of Shmuel Shnerson, he argued Rav Yisrael Salanter was concerning bitachon. Does bitachon, having absolute trust, apply to what we would call luxuries as well as the bare necessities? He said no, and Rav Yisrael Salanter says no, yes, that a person has to have bitachon, and bitachon does apply to also luxuries, and that if a person's got bitachon, absolute bitachon in Hashem concerning luxuries, then those things also will materialize, but there has to be absolute bitachon. So they took a bet. They took some sort of wager that I don't know exactly how it worked, but that Rabbi Yisrael says, look, let's take a watch. In our time, a watch is like having like a shirt. I mean, everyone's got a watch. In the times of the 1800s, a watch was a luxury. Only like wealthy people, extra people held watches. Some of them, they had watches which were town. It wasn't wrist watches. So, but it was like relatively luxurious item. And the story goes that after a couple of months, a person walked in. The Rashash was a businessman. He was an amazing person, a businessman, but he was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. And a person comes in with uniform, and what he says is to the Rashash, you know what? I've got a soldier, a Jewish soldier in my battalion, and the Jewish soldier, before he died, he had a watch. And he said that he wants this watch to be given to one of the leaders of the Jewish people. The Rashash then, right, what he did was he came to Rav Yisrael Salanter and said, yeah, you were true. It showed, that the watch, right, the watch, obviously I'm not a leader of the Jewish people, but I was given this to give to a leader of the Jewish people. And no doubt that's a hit mishamayim, that your bitachon was correct. Yehi zichro baruch, and may we all mamash be able to live to learn the shita of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, zecher tzadik v'kadosh livracha. Shabbat shalom lekulam.